Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week joining us from England is Wilson Govindji. Hey Wilson, welcome to the show.
Hello Vasco, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for pronouncing my name properly. Wilson, although the name wouldn't give it up, is actually Portuguese of Indian origins, and he has over 15 years of software development experience and worked in many different roles from support analyst, developer, tech lead, and he's now in the UK. Working and living with his family. So, Wilson, thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. It is very rare these days that I hear my name pronounced correctly. And one would not think that's important, but after 20-some years of living abroad, one starts to miss the natural pronunciation of one's name.
Likewise. I know that you are an expert on murdering names, as you say, but you have said my name properly as well. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. So, Wilson, take a minute. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Well, it's been quite a journey. To be honest, I think I became Scrum Master by a happy accident. It wasn't something that I had planned. So my background is very technical, and it was when I was working as a tech lead that I had the opportunity to lead a newly created Scrum team. So we were all new to that. But because I had read something about Agile and Scrum, I had attended one or two meetups. I've always been very curious about the role. So, I offered myself to take the role of the Scrum Master along with other responsibilities. And I think I got hooked and I never looked back since then. As I used to say, I exchange dealing with code, which is something that I always enjoy doing and challenging. But I think dealing with people is much more challenging, but it's very fulfilling at the same time. So,
especially when you feel the impact of your work in other people, because it comes back in quite amazing rewards, people's happiness and their smiles and their sense of achievement, which is something you can't do with code. I mean, you can feel your own sense of achievement with code, but you cannot feel other people's sense of achievement with code, of course. I'm sure there are many funny and perhaps even some not so funny stories from your Scrum Master career. Today's Monday here on the podcast, so we explore a story of failure. We do that because we want to learn what went on, what you learned back then, so that we can apply it ourselves. So tell us that story, Wilson.
Absolutely. Let me just start by saying that failure is not a bad thing at all. Like you said, it's an opportunity to learn. So yeah, I've had many of those under my belt, which is a good thing. But this is a story that really starts really well, but ends up with me having a sense of identity crisis. So there I was working in my first Scrum team as a Scrum Master, but also wearing many other hats. So I was a tech lead, I was developer, and I almost became a technical product owner from the supplier side. In the beginning, everything was going very smoothly. I was able to balance out all the roles without any conflict and all. However, when it was time to commit for our first release, things started going sideways. So from the pressure coming out from the customer and the business, I found myself making commitments as a technical lead and product owner that kind of conflicted with the Agile principle of working at a sustainable pace.
Can you give me an example of what that looked like at the time?
Well, basically, there was so much pressure for the release, and the customer was changing so many things all the time. But however, the date was not changing.
That
right?
Sounds very familiar, right? Like first estimate correctly, then change the scope without the team being aware of it, and then keep the estimates you gave us, even though the scope now is like 2 or 3 times bigger than it was before.
Exactly. So basically, we ended up, doing overtime. Many decisions were being changed almost in a weekly basis, so we had to rework again, change things. And again, as I said, this was a newly created team as well, so there wasn't much experience about how to go about these things. But so I found myself that it was conflicted with my role as a Scrum Master to kind of protect the team. And if I think about it, the most amazing thing is I was kind of aware of what was going on, and I wasn't feeling good about myself. And I started feeling an imposter syndrome about my role as a Scrum Master as well. And because of this self-awareness and state of mind, after a few months and a bumpy release, which happened, I decided that I had to make a decision of what I wanted to continue doing in the future. And I made a choice that I didn't want to continue in that situation where I had to use several hats that could conflict with each other. And because I experienced this part of the coaching and mentoring and helping people, I decided, okay, let me put my bets on this and let me try this role, but only taking the Scrum Master role as a whole.
I'm sure that decision must not have been easy. I mean, we've all, especially those that have started as programmers, we've all been to that point where we're kind of on the fence. Like, do I continue? Don't I continue? Like, I eventually ended up being a project manager at that time before I found Agile. The interesting part for me in this kind of stories is the questions that you raised. Like, you talked about something very specific. You said you started feeling this imposter syndrome. And I'm guessing that you did not feel the imposter syndrome as a programmer. You probably felt it more like a product owner or in the role as the Scrum Master, right? Like, so how did your thinking go when you had to balance your career, whether going more towards the Scrum Master or going back towards the technical roles?
Yeah, it's as you said, it took a lot of thought, because obviously after spending so many years as a developer and as a tech lead, it's kind of risky as well. Okay, well, I'm doing this career shift, but I was feeling so good about that part, as I told you, the part of coaching and learning new ways of working, because up until then in my career, I always work in this flawed model of waterfall and gates phased approach, which didn't really work. And I had witnessed that at firsthand, because we used to ship software and we used to go to user acceptance testing after 6 months of doing the software, and then sitting there in a room full of stakeholders. They're trying out the software and said, oh, this was not what I need. I know that this is what I asked for, but this doesn't quite look good. So and after me having this experience as a Scrum Master and start releasing every month instead of every 6 months, it kind of changed, and I got convinced, okay, there is a way to develop better software.
So was it then that, okay, so I've experienced this way, which is much better. I want to make sure I only work this way in the future. Is that what was going through your mind?
Well, at least work as much as I can in that way, because even nowadays as a Scrum Master, we have to interact with teams that are not quite agile or do not follow Scrum. But yes, as much as possible, I think the trend in the software industry is going towards small iterations and building software in that way. So yes, I definitely wanted to work like that. What better way to work as a Scrum Master and helping others doing this, and using my past experience as well to serve me and to guide the teams I kind of work with. Yeah.
Absolutely. One last thing I wanted to add to this conversation is that as you set up this story, you talked about an identity crisis. And I think this is an important realization for all of us listening. All of the Lukes out there listening to this episode, being a Scrum Master is also a little bit about identity, right? If you identify with working with people more than working with code, if you identify with helping teams more than succeeding individually, if you identify with creating a collaborative environment more than getting the algorithm right, then you probably need to be a Scrum Master. Wilson, thank you very much for sharing this story with us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.